Welcome to the AmericanaMusic.com podcast with your host, Sarah Popejoy.
Today on AmericanaMusic.com, we are lucky to have Grammy Award winner Suzy Bogguss. She's sold over 4 million records with hits like Outbound Plane, Aces, Letting Go, Someday Soon, Drive South, and Hey Cinderella. Her latest album, Praying for Sunshine, with all 10 songs, written by Suzy Bogguss. Suzy's talent is not only in her smooth vocal delivery, but in the way she pulls you into a story and makes you feel like you're listening to a friend tell it. Welcome, Suzy.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be here.
Really excited because in preparing for this interview process, I've known you as a country artist, as many people have. But what I've found fascinating is all the other layers to what you do.
That's such a very generous way to put it, instead of she's really scattered.
First off, I like starting these interviews with kind of getting to know where people grew up.
Yeah. Well, I grew up, in a real small town. It's a rural town, mostly farming and people who make farm equipment. Close to the Mississippi River over by Rock Island and Moline, Illinois. A little tiny town called Aledo. And it's surrounded by cornfields, 10 blocks long, 10 blocks wide. It really does qualify as a small town. However, the funny thing to me is, even though it's grown very slowly, because when I lived there it was about 3,300 and now it's 3,600, I'd find it encouraging and kind of sweet that it's growing and it's flourishing now. There's a lot of work on the downtown where they're trying to bring back, some of the storefronts, people using the town and living in a bedroom community. They're actually able to use this also for their businesses. And they're redoing our opera house, which had been there since the 1800s. And
wow.
It was the place that we went to watch movies when we were kids. It's been closed for a while. The folks in our town are all very dedicated, and they all have a very good vision of how they'd like to keep the small town lifestyle alive. I'm really proud of them for all pitching in like they have, and people have made some pretty big sacrifices to try to keep some of the businesses going, and now it's working. It's starting to multiply in good ways.
It's always nice to see downtowns refurbished and revitalized.
Yeah. That's really a lot of the places I play. The folks who have community centers and where the folks in the town have pulled together and renovated old theaters, things like this. Those are really great places to play. You go play a 300 or 400 seat theater like that, and I get to feel, some of the feelings of my youth, the singing in these smaller communities.
Tell me a little bit about some of your musical background, as in who kind of influenced you and how you got started.
Well, because I was the youngest in my family, so I listened to whatever records my brothers and sister were buying. And my parents, they weren't they were music buffs for sure, but they didn't buy a lot of music. My dad worked at International Harvester. We weren't rolling in it, so we didn't buy a lot of music. The ones that they listened to kind of all got into me, and my siblings and my parents, everybody had a little bit different style. My dad was the country lover. My mom was big band. My oldest brother loved the harmony vocalists, like the Four Lads and those kind of things, where it was a four-piece that, sort of like the Statler Brothers and that kind of vibe. And my sister was into the singer-songwriters like Carole King and James Taylor. And my other brother was into Creedence Clearwater and kind of funkier stuff, Arlo Guthrie. And so I grew up with a really great cross-section of everything from folk to big band. And it all kind of crept in there.
So there's a story that I read, but I want to validate that it's true first, because you know how it is with the internet and everything.
Yeah.
That you visited Roy Rogers?
Oh, yeah. So when I was a kid, and like I say, my siblings were older than me. So the Saturday morning routine at our house was that, you'd get to watch cartoons, or a lot of times it was cowboy shows. And my grandparents moved to California when I turned about 10 or 11. They moved on to the same desert block with my aunt and uncle, and they all lived on the same block as Roy Rogers and Dale Evans. So basically, my grandparents lived on two corners, and then Roy and Dale had the whole back side of that And it's a big block, because it's the desert. My grandma worked at the church with Dale in the auxiliary, and they were real good buds. When I went out on the train when I was 12 to visit, I got to go over and meet them, and they couldn't have been more down to earth or just like welcoming. They were just fantastic. In fact, I met them on Tuesday, and on Wednesday they invited me to have dinner with them, and we had TV dinners. No kidding. Yeah, for me as a kid, that was kind of cool that they ate TV dinners like we did at our house.
Yeah.
This was my spring break from 6th grade. When I got ready to leave, I realized that I hadn't gotten a picture with them. So right before my mom and I went to the train, I ran over there and I asked Dale if we could please have a picture so I could prove to my friends. So I got a picture of Roy in his rocking chair because he had a broken foot at the time that he'd done on his motorcycle. He couldn't get up to stand up and do a picture with me. But Dale, the funny story is that she literally said to me, well, let me put my wig and my girdle on and I'll come right back out and we'll get a shot. And so I have that picture that, I have both of those pictures, and they've just always been very precious to me.
That is really cool. I think I find it interesting also because of some of your, what I don't want to say influences, but that you do have some songs that are kind of cowgirl songs.
Yeah, that was definitely in me from a very early age, watching those television shows. Growing up in my small town, there was lots of horses around. I mean, one of my best friends' family, they had 14 children. They had a horse that the kids just rode around town, because they had to get down to the swimming pool because all the kids ran the concession stand there. And, we all got to ride Tawny, the whole town. All the kids in town got to ride on Tawny. And it was also another, I got to be in a trailblazing horse club, even though I didn't own a horse. My friends that lived on farms, most of them had at least ponies. Had one friend whose parents raised Arabians. So I got to be around horses a lot when I was young, and just the whole growing up with lots of sky like we did in the Midwest, it was easy for us to sort of dream about being cowgirls and cowboys because you could go for a really long ride.
That's cool. Wow. How neat. You've had a couple of jazz albums.
Yeah, I guess they are. One of them I did with a good friend of mine who's a just fabulous jazz producer. He played with Miles Davis. He's a wonderful human being, but he's very musical, and he's a keyboard guy, and he's from Manhattan, and his choice to go to school was in Indiana. So when he was doing a record of Elvis songs, he contacted me because I was from Illinois, and he just thought that I'd like to meet this girl who's in country music, but she's from the Midwest, and he had such a great time going to school in Indiana, and we just became fast friends. I brought him a blueberry pie, and I'm not kidding you. You would have thought that I'd given him a Fabergé egg or something. He was so excited about it. So we became really good friends from that record. And after I did the swing album with Ray Benson and the Asleep at the Wheel guys, he came to see me play at BB King's in New York, and he was like, well, let's go have dinner afterwards. And so we were having dinner, and he just said, well, what are you going to do next? Now you've done a swing album. How fun was that? And I said, I don't know. What are you doing? And it just slipped out of my mouth. And it just, at that moment, both of our eyes locked, and we were just like, why not? Why wouldn't we try it? So I had about 4 or 5 songs. I took them to New York to record at Tony Bennett's studio there with my friend Jason Miles. And I was so terrified that when we first started, because I had Chris Parker on drums, who played on Saturday Night Live for many years with G. Smith. And then I had T-Bone Woke also on Saturday Night Live. I had Will Lee, who was on the Letterman show for all these years. And it was like, I got in there and I was like, normally, I produced my records. I knew how to talk to the musicians, but I was so intimidated by their jazz chops and, just who they were, that I ended up calling Doug, my husband, and just saying, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. Am I going to tick off all of my people who've been following me through these years? And he said, just go with it, have fun, just see what comes out of it. And once I chilled out, I took 5 songs home that I just love, and I was able to write with friends of mine and write the rest of the record because it kind of led me in a direction. And I guess it was jazz, whatever it was. It had some jazz elements to it, and
That's really cool.
it was really fun. And it was really fun to sing it because, I enjoy all different styles of singing, but I grew up around my mom singing when she was cleaning the house and stuff. And she was sort of more of a big band era singer, really smooth and lots of Ella Fitzgerald and Doris Day kind of moves in there. And this album gave me a chance to just not sing hard at all. I never sang hard on that record. I just kind of just let it flow and phrased, and that was kind of what I was going for with that record.
That's really cool. Really cool. And when I was looking at some of the compilations you've been on, let's see here, with the Eagles album, which, I mean, that one was neat. But you were on Bob Wills, that Sleep at the Wheel put together, and then also the album that you put together of Merle Haggard songs. And what I found interesting is because I've for another project, been studying both these artists. And I live in Tulsa, so, Bob Wills is big here because of Kane's Ballroom. But what I found interesting about those two artists is that, both of them have big kind of jazz influences, especially Bob Wills. Kind of fits that's what you would do.
I'm interested in what you just said there because that's so true. I mean, obviously, Bob Wills was, a little bit older, and so he came up listening to music, I'm sure from everything from just the real big band music, with the lots of horns and those sorts of things, and then lots of fiddles and stuff playing those horn lines and making the horn lines are the harmony that they do when they're doing the double stop fiddles and things like this. And Merle, when I made the Merle Haggard record, I had sent the record to him, and he and his family sat down and listened to it all together. And then he called me, and at one point in the conversation, he said, I've always kind of felt like we were alike. And I took that to mean that he and I, we liked a lot of different styles of music, and we liked to meld them together and sing melodies that made our voices feel good. And if that meant that one song was stone country and one song was pretty much a swing melody or a big band swing melody, I kind of felt like that's what he was trying to say to me. But I mean, talk about hyperventilating when he said that.
I'm sure.
So I was like, oh my God, I just got a compliment from Merle Haggard. Oh my God.
I saw him when I was in Nashville once. Well, I mean, like you do, you see everybody in Nashville.
Yeah.
But
at the grocery store.
Yeah. I grew up listening to Merle Haggard. My dad was a big Merle Haggard fan, and so I listened to a lot of Merle Haggard growing up.
Me too. My dad was a big Merle fan too, and my next door neighbor used to sit out on his porch and play Merle songs for us little kids, in our pajamas, and all of a sudden we'd be like, oh, I know what that means. That's grown-up stuff. So it's going to the bar to drink because his wife's going out with Timmy's dad. It was like, oh my God, we know what that's about.
That is great. What I was going to say earlier is just that another song that's just kind of evident of that jazz influence to me is the Eat at Joe's. Very much has that kind of element and that sound.
Yeah, really fun for me. I don't consider myself a jazz singer at all. I don't have the chops for one thing, but I do really enjoy the really syrupy, I sang Do Nothing to Hear From Me on the Sleep at the Wheel Swing album. And I really enjoy sort of playing that mode up of kind of just like going back in time and having a little bit of a little mini movie playing in my mind when I'm singing those songs. So I feel like I'm sort of acting when I get a chance to do something like that. And also, I mean, especially Eat at Joe's because it's tongue in cheek. And I love humor in music. I think, I'm always looking for a chance to lighten things up once in a while. There's just something about that that keeps a song fresh for me. Mm-hmm. Some songs that I sing, I have like 2 or 3 different scenarios. It just depends on my mood and what the audience is giving me as to how I might play a song, whether it's I change the tempo sometimes just based on how much energy I have or how much spark the audience is giving me. And I just think it keeps it fresh for me every night so that I don't feel like I'm phoning it in and I'm not just on autopilot. I do encourage that from the musicians that are playing with me to take a long solo, go for it, to have some fun. And that's kind of a jazzier vibe as well, to go ahead and expound on an idea that you just started during that first 8 bars and let yourself play it out, because some real magic happens during those times. And sometimes those kind of serendipitous licks that somebody might create might be the next start of a song, or it might be the hook line, that the signature lick that kind of makes that song recognizable from the downbeat of the song. So I always think that it's really healthy to let the musicians stretch out, have some fun.
Yeah, that is definitely a jazz element, and also something that Bob Wills did a lot of too.
It's real good if you sucked a bug, if you need a little time before you can sing again. You got real dry throat or whatever. It's like, oh, keep going, guys.
That's awesome. Your third album, Aces, which was really your kind of breakthrough album in country music, was actually the first album you produced. You also released a new version of that album in Aces Redux on your label Loyal Duchess Records.
Right.
So basically you were doing Suzy versions before Taylor versions. And
that's kind of it. I mean, I'll just fess up and be candid about it. At a certain point, an artist is allowed to re-record their songs. And because content is very important these days with all the different places to distribute things these days, it really does help an artist out to have a rendition or a recording of their hits that belongs to them and not to the record label. Because then if you can get someone to license that for a movie or something else, then you actually get the pay, whereas the label would get the pay if they use the original version. So I will tell you, that's one of the reasons that people do that with their songs, is they re-record them so that they now can control that version of the song, because you can't really control the ones that belong to the record label.
For sure.
And also, in my case, I've been doing more stripped down shows for, 20 years now, not using a huge band very often. Sometimes when we have a new album coming out, we'll take a run and do some of the major cities or something like that with a bigger band. But mostly I travel with a trio, including me. So it's a small unit. So in doing all those hits and things, and then having people take home the old record and then having it sound like 90s drums and have this big sound that those records had from that time period versus something that was much more emulating the show that they just saw. So that's why I really stripped them back and did acoustic versions of those songs, so that when they took that home as their souvenir, it was something more representative of what they saw at the show.
What I find interesting, too, the first one you produced was the one that really took off. I think that's kudos to you. But what has always really impressed me about you, besides your vocals, was your song selection by great songwriters. I was introduced to the folk Americana singer-songwriter world in part because of your songs. You introduced me to Nancy Griffith with Outbound Plane, the song Aces by Cheryl Wheeler. I found out about her because of you. And then also you have that John Hyatt song, Drive South, who's another exceptional singer-songwriter. Mm-hmm. Always felt that you've kind of had a talent for song selection. What makes a great song for you?
Wow. I feel like it kind of depends on what I'm looking for at the time. But when I hear something that feels like the writer was having a stream of conscious kind of flow of idea,
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, why I've picked some of the people that I've recorded through the years. I think that those kinds of songs that don't sound fabricated, that sound honest and just like, man, this just fell out of me. And you'll hear songwriters say that sometimes. It's like, I don't know if I really wrote this song or who wrote it, because it just kind of fell out. And those are the ones I usually look for. I try to find something that I feel like I can convey with the same kind of genuine performance that feels like it's honest and like I can put myself in that position. I feel, I'm moved by the song. I guess that's kind of it. And, I was a huge fan of Emmylou Harris, when I first started buying records when I got to college, and always felt like Emmy was just the queen of picking perfect songs for her and songs that just really needed to be out there and illuminated. So maybe I studied from her and Linda, and also, I think because I was a very nervous writer when I first started, and I felt like there were so many people that were saying what I wanted to say better than I could say it. I think that Emmy and Linda gave me license to sing other people's songs and not feel like I was not an artist still, to feel like giving your take on the song was enough to make you worthy of the artist status. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think in some ways, just even the records that my parents bought when I was growing up, where they would have Ray Charles singing I Can't Stop Loving You, and they would also have Dean Martin singing I Can't Stop Loving You. And they were completely different, just performances and completely different arrangements. And I just feel like that also, it's like somewhere in me, it said, yeah, James Taylor sang a Carole King song. You don't have to write everything in order to be considered an artist.
But I do think that there is a certain ear for good songs too,
Well, I accept your compliment and thank you. I appreciate that.
During the pandemic, you started an online show called Wind Down Wednesday. Tell me a little bit about it. And obviously it was inspired by the lockdown, but tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, it was kind of inspired by the panic. It's been rare for me to take a long period of time off the road. I love playing, and I have the kind of the troubadour personality where I'm really kept afloat by things like applause and people liking what I do and making people happy and feeling that kind of energy that I get from feeling like I've done something, moved somebody, or brought them up, made them feel better. That brings me up and makes me feel better. I didn't know that I didn't know what was going to happen when I first started it. It was really just a way for me to connect. And also I wanted to be bringing people up who were really down because of this situation and really locked and, just couldn't go anywhere, couldn't do anything. And so that was my initial start out. I think I didn't even sing on the first time I went on air. I might have sung just like a little piece of something. And then I realized, if I sing for these guys, now I get to choose some stuff that I don't normally do in my shows. This is all kind of free for all. And so I used that to kind of keep my chops up, because if I had just not played and not sung for however long it was going to be, and I had no clue, I knew that I was, my hands were going to get stiff. My voice was going to get atrophied. I'd be having to like really gain back a lot. So it gave me an excuse to practice and to work up some songs that just popped into my head. Most weeks it was really random stuff that like a day or two before I'd think, I'm going to do this one and this one and this one. And then, it turned into so many people were passing away that it'd be like, here's a tribute to B.J. Thomas, and here's for Tom T. Hall. And, it was just like, it kind of turned into that. And then once we got some vaccinations and stuff and people could come to my house and be spaced apart and we could sing, oh my God. I mean, like, even though, we couldn't party and stuff like that, we could just sit 6 feet apart and sing our songs and then put our masks back on and say, I love you. And and, get out of my house. Most of the time we would go outside, afterwards or whatever. Camaraderie was like life-saving. Then I could feel that the other people were thrilled about just seeing the collaborations, because we would do some random off-the-wall song and then maybe give some background about why we were friends or whatever. And from one thing went to another, and just it turned into 4 years of doing that every single week. And so I did
wow,
I don't know, 202 or 4 or something like that. And then I was just so busy on the road with the new album and stuff that I just had to say, okay, guys, we got to go to once a month. I got Jim Lauderdale coming, and we're going to try to raise some money for the East Tennessee and North Carolina folks. And we did several of those during that time. Initially, people tipped, but it's never been about any kind of money situation. It's always been, this is free entertainment for you. And if you have fun, come in and ask your questions and let's have some fun. And then when we did anything that was a benefit thing, then those folks would gladly pitch in, because they weren't having to pitch in every single week. It really was, I don't want to say labor of love, because I loved it without any of the labor. It was just incredible to be in touch with folks. So it's been a lot of fun for me. And I also, I get around friends now and they're like, when are you going to ask me to do Wind Down Wednesday? And I'm like, hooray, let's keep doing it.
I remember watching a few during the pandemic myself as well. So they were definitely good medicine.
And pretty squirrely. A lot of times very squirrely.
Well, I think it was good to be just connecting. I know the Indigo Girls, I think, had something similar.
Yeah, they did something. Mary Gauthier did one with Jamie Harris, and there were quite a few people that were doing them at that time. But I'm not sure that they were all drinking like I was, so. I have a rehearsal with Matresa and Gretchen. We're opening for the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band at the Ryman in a couple of weeks, and it's been a hot minute since we were Wine, Women, and Song, so we got to do some rehearsing.
Fast forward to the end of 2023, you released Praying for Sunshine.
Right.
Kind of talk about some of the songs off those albums, a few in particular.
Sure.
You were talking about Gretchen Peters and Matresa Berg. One of the songs, Camille. So I'm going to just read the chorus. You feel like a fool, you feel like a drink, and you drink so you don't have to feel, but you still do, Camille. And where did you guys come up with the storyline for that?
Well, Matresa and Gretchen and I have been friends for, since the early 90s, and like really good friends. We got the idea that we were going to go over to the UK and do this little trio thing called Wine, Women, and Song. So before the first trip over, we decided, well, let's make an EP. And so we went to a cabin and just hung out and drank a lot of wine and stayed up really late. And I'm thinking that Camille came during our first getaway. It was a song that started, we always take turns cooking dinner for each other when we do these getaways. And so I think we were starting dinner and somebody was playing a chord progression, and I was like, oh my God, that is so dark and so beautiful. Let's work on that. So as the evening went on, I remembered that the actual first line was the very first line of the song, which is, the moon had a fight with a parking lot light and slunk off to hide in the cloud. And that was basically a combination of the two girls tweaking it until they got the word slunk off to hide in the clouds. And I was over the moon. And so that really started the whole scenario of what was happening with this girl. And, because all three of us mentor a lot of younger gals and stuff, we see them in positions that we found ourselves in when we were younger. And it's easy to relate to that. And it's also easy to say, oh, honey, don't make this mistake. I mean, Matresa and I wrote a song called Somebody to Love that is a similar kind of a vibe, but it's not quite as dark and it's not quite as graphic. Camille's a really graphic song, but that was how it came about. And it just, I don't know, her name just kind of fell out. I think we started out with a different name, and then eventually it was like, since that's the last word in the chorus, the consonants and everything, was like, oh, Camille, that's it.
And a couple more songs on the album, Sunday Birmingham Birmingham, which has gorgeous melody and lyrics, and the Delta blues feel of All Falls Down to the River, which is a really phenomenal song about Katrina and the Trail of Tears and a reference to Martin Luther King Jr. That's a really gorgeous song with the river as a metaphor for the past and the present connecting.
Yeah, it's my husband is an amazing lyricist. I mean, amazing poet. And I'm so lucky that I live with him because, just a conversation about something in the news can sometimes get the wheels running up there for him. So when we got into this song, it was like it had to be a blues. A lot of times Doug will have something started, a chorus or a piece of something, and he's really great. If I'm going to sing the song, he lets me sort of take the musical lead. That was, for me, it had to be a blues. In fact, at one point I was working on the melody and I went over to Kev Mo's house because it lived really close to me. I was toying with a slightly different melody in the verse. And he said, you don't have to change chords there to do that melody. And when he said that to me, it really rang true. So I went home and with that in my mind, and he was absolutely right. We didn't have to make all the chord changes, and by keeping it really simple and hanging on the one chord for like the whole verse, it just allowed me to just really like get in there and make those lyrics get in your brain. Now, I'm not speaking them, but I'm almost speaking them. And keeping it in my lower register means that when I get to the big parts where it has to get kind of forceful, I don't have to worry about it. It's like I'm not squeaking. I'm still in the meat of my voice. And that's been a lot of fun for me. And just like playing with some of the changes that happen as you get older, and your voice is sort of shifting in some ways. It's just been kind of fun to mess with that stuff. I'm really careful about that song, that I don't try to tell anybody what it's about, because I have heard so many wonderful versions of what people get from that song that I'm really careful to let everyone have their way that they see the song or hear the song, and how it speaks to them, because it really is kind of one of those songs that is poetry.
Well, Suzy, thank you so much for joining us today. I really, really appreciate it. It's really been a pleasure.
Well, it's been a pleasure for me too. Thank you for thinking of me and wanting me to be on your podcast.
Oh, thank you, Suzy. And most importantly, I'd like to thank you, the listener. Be sure to check out our website at americanamusic.com, and you'll find the Spotify playlist with songs from all of our artists you should know and interviews from the podcast. You'll also find more online interviews and articles, and you can sign up for the americanamusic.com newsletter. Thank you so much for listening to Season 1, and we'll be seeing you in Season 2, set for January of 2025.